A volcano does not usually erase and rebuild its own summit within the span of a few years, yet that is precisely what has unfolded at Kilauea. The ground sank by hundreds of meters, the crater widened into a vast depression, and then, almost as quickly in geological terms, molten rock began to reclaim what had been lost. How does a volcano collapse inward so dramatically without ending its activity? What forces allow it to reverse direction and begin refilling the void it created? And more importantly, what has fundamentally changed beneath the surface since the events of 2018? The answers lie not in a single eruption, but in a sequence of tightly linked processes that began with a shift deep within the volcano's plumbing system. In the months leading up to the collapse, pressure had been building within Kilauea's magma reservoir. Instruments recorded inflation, rising lava levels, and increasing seismicity, all signals of a system under strain as molten rock accumulated beneath the summit. What followed was not an isolated eruption, but a redistribution of magma across the volcano, a transfer that would drain the summit and destabilize the ground above it. By late April of that year, magma began migrating away from the summit toward the lower eastern flank. Within hours of a structural failure at Pu'u'o'o, earthquakes propagated down the rift zone, marking the path of underground movement. The summit lava lake, once a persistent feature within Halemaumau crater, began to drop. Measurements showed a rapid decline, tens of meters within days, signaling that the reservoir feeding it was being emptied. What happened next redefined expectations of how calderas can behave. As magma drained, the summit lost internal support. The overlying rock began to fracture and collapse in a series of discrete events. These were not minor adjustments, but powerful structural failures, each accompanied by earthquakes equivalent to magnitude 5 events. The pattern repeated over and over, roughly every 1 to 2 days, as the ground subsided in increments. Over the course of several months, this process carved out a dramatically enlarged caldera. The summit area dropped by hundreds of meters, equivalent to several hundred feet, and the crater expanded laterally, consuming previous features and reshaping the landscape entirely. Explosive activity accompanied some of these collapses, sending ash columns rising several thousand meters, equivalent to several miles, into the atmosphere. The transformation was not gradual in the conventional sense. It occurred through pulses of failure, each one adjusting the structure downward as magma continued to drain away. At the same time, the eruption unfolding along the lower east rift zone was feeding on the magma withdrawn from the summit. Lava fountains, fissures, and flows devastated large sections of land, destroying entire communities and covering vast areas with new rock. The connection between these distant events was direct. The more magma that erupted down rift, the more the summit collapsed. By early September, the eruption subsided. The magma transfer slowed, seismic activity decreased, and the collapse sequence came to an end. For the first time in months, the summit stabilized, but what remained was not the same volcano. The geometry of the caldera had been fundamentally altered, leaving a deep, steep-walled depression where a shallower crater once existed. Then, in the quiet that followed, a different process began. Within about 1 year after the collapse, water started to accumulate at the bottom of Halemaumau. It appeared gradually, forming a lake in a place that had previously been dominated by heat and molten rock. This development was significant, not because water in volcanic craters is unusual, but because of what it implied about the system. The presence of a stable water body indicated that the heat flux had decreased enough to allow accumulation rather than immediate evaporation. The lake deepened slowly over time, becoming a visible marker of the new conditions at the summit. It also represented a potential hazard, as interactions between water and magma can produce explosive eruptions. Yet for months, the system remained relatively quiet, with no immediate return of lava to the crater floor. That changed abruptly in late December of 2020. An eruption began within Halemaumau, sending lava pouring into the crater. The water lake, which had taken months to develop, was eliminated in roughly 90 minutes, equivalent to 1.5 hours, as heat and lava rapidly boiled it away. The transition from a water-filled crater to an active lava lake was sudden, illustrating how quickly conditions can shift when magma re-enters the system. This eruption marked the beginning of the refilling phase. Lava began to accumulate within the deep caldera, gradually building up the crater floor. Unlike the dramatic collapse events of 2018, this process was constructive rather than destructive. Instead of the ground dropping in discrete steps, it rose steadily as successive eruptions deposited layers of solidified lava. From that point onward, Kilauea entered a pattern of intermittent summit eruptions. Activity would start, pause, and then resume, each episode adding more material to the crater. By the early part of this decade, multiple eruptions had occurred within the summit area, each contributing to the gradual infilling of the depression left by the collapse. The scale of this refilling is measurable. In some areas, lava flows have accumulated to thicknesses exceeding 100 meters, equivalent to more than 300 feet, indicating substantial rebuilding of the crater floor. What had once been a deep void is being progressively raised, though it has not yet returned to its pre-collapse elevation. This sequence of collapse, followed by refilling, is not entirely unprecedented in volcanic systems, but the speed and clarity with which it has occurred at Kilauea provide a rare opportunity to observe the full cycle in near real time. The key factor driving both phases is the movement of magma within the volcano's internal network. When magma drains away, the surface collapses. When it returns, the surface rebuilds. However, the system that exists now is not identical to the one that existed before 2018. The collapse altered the geometry of the magma reservoir and the pathways through which magma travels. The caldera is larger and deeper, the pressure conditions have changed, and the interactions between magma, gas, and groundwater are different. Even the style of eruptions has shown variation. Some recent activity has included episodic lava fountaining and rapid changes in eruption intensity, suggesting that the dynamics of magma supply and storage have evolved. These differences are subtle when viewed over short timescales, but become more apparent when compared to the steady-state behavior that characterized much of the period before the collapse. Another critical change lies in how the summit responds to magma movement. Prior to 2018, the presence of a persistent lava lake indicated a relatively stable connection between the magma reservoir and the surface. That stability was disrupted during the collapse, and the subsequent eruptions have been more episodic, reflecting a system that is still adjusting. The broader structure of the volcano also plays a role. Kilauea is not a static edifice. Its flanks are constantly moving outward due to gravitational forces and the intrusion of magma. Fault systems within the volcano accommodate this movement, and shifts along these structures can influence how magma is distributed. Over time, these processes contribute to cycles of inflation, deflation, collapse, and refilling. What has become clear since 2018 is that the summit and the rift zones are tightly coupled. Activity in one region directly affects the other. When magma is diverted downrift, the summit can collapse. When supply returns to the summit, eruptions resume there. This interconnected behavior means that changes observed at the surface are expressions of deeper, system-wide adjustments. The period since the collapse has therefore been one of transition. The volcano is not simply returning to its previous state, it is evolving into a new configuration shaped by the events of the past few years. Each eruption, each pulse of magma, and each incremental rise of the crater floor contributes to that ongoing transformation, and yet, despite the visible progress of refilling, the process remains incomplete. The caldera still retains much of the depth created during the collapse, and the long-term trajectory of the system is not fully defined. Whether the summit will eventually return to a stable lava lake state, or continue with episodic eruptions, is an open question tied to the behavior of the magma supply. What is certain is that Kilauea has demonstrated an ability to rapidly reconfigure itself, collapsing and rebuilding within a time frame that challenges conventional expectations. The events since 2018 have provided a detailed record of how such transformations occur, revealing the mechanisms that link deep magma movement to surface change. The ongoing activity at Kilauea after the initial refilling phase reveals a system that has not simply resumed its former behavior, but has shifted into a new operational state defined by altered pressure balances, modified magma pathways, and a summit structure that now responds differently to internal changes. The eruptions that followed the late December event did not settle into a continuous outpouring of lava. Instead, they unfolded in pulses, sometimes separated by pauses lasting days, weeks, or even months, indicating that the supply of magma to the summit reservoir is no longer as steady as it once appeared before 2018. One of the most noticeable developments in the years after the collapse has been the repeated rise and fall of lava within Halemaumau crater. These fluctuations are not random. They reflect the interplay between magma supply from depth and the release of gas within the system. When magma ascends, it brings dissolved gases that expand as pressure decreases. This expansion can drive lava upward, sometimes producing fountaining episodes that send molten material tens of meters, equivalent to several dozen yards, into the air. At other times, when supply wanes or gas escapes more efficiently, the lava surface drops, exposing cooled crust and temporarily quieting visible activity. Measurements have shown that the crater floor continues to rise incrementally with each eruptive episode. Layers of basalt accumulate, welding together as they cool, gradually reducing the depth of the caldera created during the collapse. In some sectors, the elevation gain has reached over 100 meters, equivalent to more than 300 feet, yet significant portions of the depression remain unfilled. The geometry of the crater has therefore become more complex, with uneven surfaces, benches, and partially buried structures that did not exist prior to 2018. Another shift involves the way deformation is distributed across the summit region. Before the collapse, inflation and deflation cycles were often expressed in relatively smooth patterns, detectable through gradual ground uplift or subsidence. After the collapse, deformation signals have become more localized and sometimes more abrupt. Instruments have recorded rapid inflation events, where the ground rises measurably over short periods, followed by sudden deflation associated with eruptive activity. These sharper transitions suggest that the magma storage zones beneath the summit have been reorganized, possibly into smaller or more compartmentalized reservoirs. Seismic activity also reflects this reconfiguration. Earthquakes beneath Kilauea's summit and along its rift zones continue to occur, but their distribution and frequency have shifted. Instead of the repetitive collapse-related earthquakes that characterized the events of 2018, the current pattern includes swarms associated with magma movement, intrusion, and pressure adjustments. Some of these swarms precede eruptions, providing indications of magma rising toward the surface, while others occur without leading to visible activity, implying that magma can move within the system without necessarily erupting. The relationship between the summit and the rift zones remains a critical factor in understanding what has changed. Prior to the collapse, long-lived eruptions along the East Rift Zone, particularly at Pu'u-o-o-o, acted as a primary outlet for magma. That vent remained active for decades, continuously releasing lava and stabilizing pressure within the system. The shutdown of that vent during the events of 2018 removed a key pathway for magma discharge. Since then, the summit has taken on a more dominant role, with most recent eruptions occurring within or near Halemaumau. This shift has implications for how pressure builds and is released. Without a persistent rift zone eruption, magma supplied from depth accumulates beneath the summit until it finds a pathway upward. This can lead to episodic eruptions characterized by rapid onset and varying intensity. The absence of a continuous outlet may also contribute to the observed cycles of inflation and deflation, as the system alternates between periods of accumulation and release. Gas emissions provide another window into the evolving state of the volcano. Sulfur dioxide output, a key indicator of magma degassing, has varied significantly during recent eruptions. Periods of high emission correspond to active lava output and vigorous degassing, while quieter intervals show reduced emissions. These fluctuations suggest that the connectivity between the magma reservoir and the surface is variable, sometimes allowing gases to escape freely and at other times restricting their release. Thermal observations reinforce these findings. Satellite and ground-based measurements have detected changes in heat output that align with eruptive cycles. During active phases, thermal anomalies intensify as fresh lava is exposed. During pauses, the surface cools, forming crusts that insulate the molten material beneath. These cycles of heating and cooling further illustrate the episodic nature of the current eruptive regime. One of the more subtle yet important changes since 2018 lies in the interaction between magma and groundwater. The brief existence of the water lake within Halemaumau demonstrated that the thermal balance at the summit had shifted enough to allow water accumulation. Although that lake was rapidly eliminated during the subsequent eruption, the possibility of water returning under the right conditions remains. This introduces an additional variable into the system, as future interactions between water and magma could influence eruption style, potentially increasing explosivity under certain circumstances. The structural integrity of the caldera walls is another factor that continues to evolve. The collapse created steep, unstable slopes composed of fractured rock. Over time, sections of these walls have experienced rockfalls and minor collapses, gradually modifying the shape of the crater. These processes contribute material to the crater floor and can also affect how lava flows spread during eruptions. The ongoing adjustment of the caldera structure is therefore both a consequence of the initial collapse and an active component of the volcano's current behavior. Beyond the summit, the broader edifice of Kilauea continues to respond to internal and external forces. The south flank, known for its seaward movement, remains one of the most dynamic parts of the volcano. This motion is driven by a combination of gravitational spreading and magma intrusion, and it is accommodated by fault systems that can generate earthquakes. While this flank movement is not new, its interaction with the post-collapse magma system adds another layer of complexity, influencing how stress is distributed and how magma pathways may evolve. The cumulative effect of these changes is a volcano that operates with a different rhythm than it did before 2018. The steady, long-lived lava lake that once defined the summit has been replaced by a pattern of intermittent activity. The collapse reset the system, altering its internal architecture and forcing it into a new equilibrium that is still being established. Monitoring efforts have adapted accordingly, with increased emphasis on integrating multiple data streams to track the volcano's behavior. Ground deformation, seismicity, gas emissions, and thermal data are all used in combination to build a comprehensive picture of what is happening beneath the surface. This integrated approach is necessary because no single data set fully captures the complexity of the system. Changes in one parameter often correspond to shifts in others, and understanding these relationships is key to interpreting the volcano's activity. As the caldera continues to refill, one of the central questions is how far this process will go. The volume of lava required to restore the summit to its pre-collapse state is substantial, and the rate at which magma is supplied from depth will determine how quickly or whether that state is approached. It is possible that the volcano may stabilize at a new configuration before fully refilling the caldera, leaving a permanently altered summit. At the same time, the potential for future large-scale events cannot be ruled out. The processes that led to the 2018 collapse, namely the redistribution of magma and the coupling between the summit and rift zones, remain active. If conditions align in a similar way, another significant shift in activity could occur. though the exact form it would take is uncertain given the changes that have already taken place. What stands out most clearly is that Kilauea is not simply recovering from a past event, it is actively redefining itself through each eruption, each intrusion, and each incremental change in its structure. The collapse and refilling are not separate chapters but parts of a continuous process driven by the movement of magma and the response of the surrounding rock. This evolving state underscores the importance of sustained observation. Every new eruptive episode provides additional data, refining the understanding of how the system operates. Patterns that were once considered stable have been replaced by variability, and assumptions based on past behavior must be reassessed in light of recent changes. The developments since 2018 have transformed Kilauea into one of the most closely observed volcanic systems in the world, not because it is the most explosive, but because it offers a clear, ongoing example of how a volcano can collapse and rebuild within a relatively short period. The insights gained extend beyond this single volcano, informing broader models of caldera dynamics and magma transport. As activity continues, the balance between collapse and construction remains a defining characteristic. The summit that once subsided dramatically is now rising, layer by layer, but the forces responsible for both processes are still present beneath the surface. The system remains dynamic, responsive, and capable of rapid change, with each new development adding to the record of how Kilauea is evolving in the years following its most transformative event in recent history. If you found this breakdown clear and informative, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and tap that hype icon to help this video reach a wider audience.